This is what I did to sketch out this water concept for production, and I'm gonna walk you through all of the small steps and tips I did to take this from a solid blob sketch up to a fully made shaded water ready to be worked for VFX construction or video games. So the very first step I did was having a structure for the water. I laid down this simple sketch and I used some references to ensure I was trying to understand water correctly and how it behaves in nature. Water, like any kind of liquid, should behave something like a bunch of particles. So think of it as a bunch of tiny little dots trying to stick together between them. That's what I try to think about when I try to emulate this basic shape. And so I thought about water as some big chunks of particles being grouped together, some big chunky boys, such as this one in the middle, and some small little particles floating around because they are the spread of the overall water. Because what I wanted to do initially is something like a stream water body thrown at something or potentially someone. And so these little particles are going to be getting ripped apart from the main body because some little particles don't have the tension, don't have the cohesion to be glued up into the main part, and they will fall eventually due to gravity. And so after having the main body already set up, I went into a polished state of the overall silhouette of the water to try to resemble a more ironed out silhouette of the final water that I wanted to have. So I added some creases onto it and I dared to have another small chunk getting ripped apart from the main body, which is this one at the top, and just some finer details overall to make it look more randomly, more organic, since it'll emulate even more spread of the water from the main body. And so with the details, what I wanted to do is fill it. Yeah, not like that, not a complete flood. Come on, how many times do I have to duck it up to understand that I have to fill all the gaps? So yeah, with all the gaps filled, I was able to get the simple full shape that I wanted to have, and I tried to rinse out even more details out of some specific parts of the shape of the water. This was a simple third pass I wanted to make on the shape to ensure I was 100% happy with what I was trying to lay out. And basically what I wanted to do is have even more details out of this wider chunk of water and have it even more grained out, even more ironed out. And so I went to try to fill it up again, and from all of the times that I had to work on a simple concept, yeah, guess who tried to paint new details on a previous older layer and made a new layer just to paint on top of the older layer? Yeah, I did. So I had to try and make the same work all over again, and that's why you're seeing this new layer of even another rinse out of details. And you would have thought that I learned out of my mistakes, but guess who left even another gap without filling? Yes, I did. And so with all the details already filled and a much better darker background, which would contrast even more with my water details, I wanted to try the lighter details out from the water, like a foam on the top part of the water, because some of my references, foam on water is created on the most turbulent parts of the water. So it's mostly concentrated on the top parts of water whenever we see, for example, a simple wave, or whenever we're trying to throw water at the pool. This foam is created at the top part of the water. But I really didn't like this approach, so I tried another one better, which was trying to get some of the lighter details on top of the water, and then the below part would remain darker to indicate that this was the big chunk of the water that was mostly still. So the part of the water that would keep most of the color that is not that rinsed out of motion. but I wanted it to be even more cartoon, so I tried to rinse out even another layer of detail below the highlights of the water. So I wanted to try and test what some hollow points would look like on top of the much lighter details, to try to give some three-dimensionality onto it, because I still had some of the detail from my previous base shape behind of it. I also tried to apply a simple gradient on top of it to see how it looked like, and I kind of liked the result. And so after rinsing this first highlight, I went into making the white highlights of my water. So what I tried to attempt with these white highlights was to give more power to the highlights beneath them. And in order to do that, what I wanted to do is try to follow more or less the same path as I did for the first highlight, but making some simple shape variations by breaking the previous follow-throughs of the first shapes in order to bring a more organic feel. And also I tried to make the highlights on top of the broader details of the water to try to emulate this Fresnel effect, to bring in even more attention to some of the areas of interest of the shape, which are the tips and some simple parts of the center line of the shape. And so to give even more variation, I gave it a gradient and tried just simple colors to see what fitted. So I definitely wanted to have the tips to be completely white, but I wanted to go deeper in color as I went deeper into the body of the water, to ensure that I left out all of the interest points just at the tip of the water, and then just give some small highlights on top of the main body of the water. And after I was happy with the result, I wanted to rinse out the shape even more. I wanted to test out what if I gave some more chunkiness into some parts of the water overall to give more contrast. So something that works a lot for me in terms of shapes is having lots of bigger spots contrasted with very small shapes. So as you can see, I have very small details over here, which represents this foam that is dropping out of the main body, and then the main body has very big chunks of water attached to it to give this contrast much more power. I just went down into trying to refine even more my details of the water, and for this part of the water, it was just trying to test what kind of lines felt better, which ones didn't. So this was just, for the most part, testing and iteration and just values, more color onto it, just trying to keep my shape simple because I was trying to emulate water, so I want them to be very blobby, but at the same time wanting to have this interest of breaking shapes with contrast, so having bigger circles and smaller circles all together. And when I was done with it, with a result I was happy with, I applied a simple soft light layer on top of the water to give a much more interesting and more contrasted color. And finally, because we were just arriving to the end of the road, I wanted just to add some simple small details to the water, so trying to give some more highlights onto the main body of the water. And I wanted it to be very overloaded. I wanted a very foamy water, so I added a lot of very huge white spots. And as I tell you, something that really works for me is having very big spots contrasted with very small spots, mixed all together to give a much more interesting shape to the overall structure of the effect. And with some little finer details onto it, just to try and test which spots did work and which ones didn't, I just went down onto the final run of the water, and that was it. This was the final result. And I hope this encourages you to go and start making a water on your own. And tell us which was the most hard part for you to follow through with this water effect. I'm very eager to see what you can create